Hey guys, how you doing? As promised, I'm back today to talk about the proposed Formula One calendar, or the targeted Formula One calendar as they've called it. What effects that might have on everybody involved, from fans at home to the circuits, to the teams, to marshals, race organisers, race officials. So many parties go into making up a Formula One Grand Prix. So many people have a stake in this and should have a say in this, and certainly have an opinion on this. So I thought today we'd get into a few of those. Let's start with looking at the calendar, because I touched on it yesterday, and yes, it's an optimistic calendar, and a lot of people have messaged me since that came out yesterday saying, can this even really happen? Because right now we're still in lockdown. Here in the UK, we simply can't travel, and that's the case for most places as things stand. And yet we're talking about a Grand Prix series, a Formula One championship that will circumnavigate the globe. So of course that can't happen until certain restrictions are relaxed, at the very minimum, in terms of travel. Formula One understand that, of course. That's one of the prerequisites for any of this actually taking place at all. So let's take that aside for a moment. The next thing is, if we do start this Grand Prix season, as is currently sort of speculated or planned, beginning in Austria and then Silverstone, so starting in Europe, perhaps with more than one race at each of those locations, what effect could that have? Because a few people have messaged me saying, does that not mean we're going to get two races at the same circuit, probably on the same layout, because we can't go in reverse? We've already sort of ruled that out. Circuits are just not set up to go in reverse. They're not safe. That would require a huge amount of investment to reposition things like gravel traps, barriers, curbing, marshal posts. That's a lot of money that has to go into that for what would be perhaps a one-off event. Who's going to pay for that? The circuits certainly won't. Liberty have got enough financial challenges, let's say, on their hands right now, even holding these races. And so does that mean we're going to get two races that are pretty much the same? I mean, of course, any sporting event has a certain amount of randomness to it. We don't know, but there's a high chance you'll get a very similar result in two races, whether they're a few days apart or a week apart, because the guys who are quick there will still be quick a week later. And yes, you've got the random events, like there might be a crash or someone might spin or have some kind of failure. But in terms of performance, we pretty much know in the second event what the order or the pecking order will be from the event that might have already happened there. Will that turn some fans off from watching the second one? I mean, I don't know. These are questions I'm putting back to you. I guess the point of all of this is that Liberty particularly need as many races as they can to fulfill many of their obligations to things like broadcasters, to make sure they don't have to give back huge chunks of those broadcasting rights fees, which could run into the hundreds of millions if that were the case, if they were to fail to meet some of those contractual demands. I've read all sorts of things that certain broadcasters in different locations have different numbers within their contract that constitutes what they class as fulfilling the contract. Some say it might be around 15, some say it's more like 18. For others, it might be even less than that. What that means is if you get less than, let's say, 15 races, Liberty may well have to pay back huge chunks of money to those broadcast rights holders. That's something they want to avoid. And then we've got the challenge of holding races behind closed doors. What could that mean? How could that actually work? Of course, as fans, we all love, if you've ever been to a Grand Prix, one of the best things about it is the atmosphere. It's about sharing that experience with other people in the same place at the same time. Now, of course, everybody would love to have that. Everybody in the sport would love to have that. But I think it's generally accepted that that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, is bringing perhaps 100,000 or more people into one location is going to be really tough, certainly in the short term. But that then raises the question, if we can't do that, if it's not safe to bring a huge number of people together in one location, i.e. fans, is it then safe to ask the thousands of people that will be needed to stage a Grand Prix, in terms of the operational staff, the teams and everybody involved in setting that up, is it safe and is it fair to ask those people to come together into the same location to perform their roles, basically in what boils down to a form of entertainment? Now, I've got a lot of friends who still work in Formula One. I speak to many of them regularly, and I happen to know that lots of people are pretty uncomfortable about this the way it is right now. Pretty uncomfortable about the fact that their teams off the back of Formula One asking their teams to turn up to an event. Now, there's going to be a period of time when restrictions may well be lifted in any given country. There's going to be a period of time, even in the general public terms, of bringing confidence back to people, giving people the confidence that not only are they able or allowed within the rules to travel or go places, but have they got the confidence to go and do that? Are they comfortable enough to send them and their families out into these big groups of people again? There's going to be a lag or a delay between the rules being lifted and actually in practice that coming back into reality. And I think that's the feeling I'm getting from those working in the sport. Not just mechanics and engineers and people within teams, but perhaps more importantly, their families. And I spoke to my wife this morning. I said, look, if I was still travelling with a team or with Sky, on the broadcasting side, and this was the case, if on the 5th of July they asked me to fly to Austria and they told me that it was going to be safe because we'd all be travelling in restricted chartered flights, buses from the airport to the circuit where we're all together, we'd all be tested to make sure that none of us are carrying the virus at that point. And she still said, I don't think I'd be comfortable with that, because you've still got to go to an airport, you've still got to go through the various immigration processes, you've still got to go through lots of scenarios where you're mixing with other people. And even if at some stage on that journey they've been tested and proven that they don't have the symptoms or they're not carrying the virus at that stage, is there really a guarantee that they haven't picked it up on the way to the airport if they were tested at home or at some other stage? Is there anything to prove or any way of confirming that there's not the virus being carried on some kind of piece of equipment that may have been transported? Or has anyone tested every single person that's been into the circuit, cleaners? I mean, there are so many people that come into contact with the same places and areas that Formula One personnel would have to come into contact. And what my wife said, and I totally understand it, is it just doesn't feel like this is an absolutely necessary thing. And of course, that view will depend on which side of the fence you're sitting on. If you're Liberty Media, absolutely this is necessary for the survival of your investment, but your business, for the teams involved and all of the staff that work at those teams. You could argue there's a very good case that if we don't do something like this, jobs will be lost, teams will be lost, and the sport will suffer as a whole, including all of the people that work within that sport. So there is an argument on that side. But I happen to know that there are a number of people within teams that are very uncomfortable about the way this is being talked about right now. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting, because the other day somebody, in fact more than one person, who is working as a marshal at Formula One events contacted me to say, has anybody consulted the marshals in this whole discussion? And as far as he's aware, they haven't. And that's interesting because most Grand Prix, certainly the bigger Grand Prix, can take up to 1,000 marshals to put on the event. Now, some of those are marshalling fans. Now, if we're behind closed doors, obviously they're not needed. But there's still a large number of marshals needed to stage the event. That's a given. We need that from a safety perspective. Those marshals are all volunteers. They're giving up their time for free. They're travelling to Grand Prix events at their own expense, staying in hotels or camping or wherever they're doing at their own expense, paying for their own food over the course of that race weekend. They contribute not only their time, but a reasonable amount of their own expenses because they love our sport and they love to do their bit and give something back. Well, not only do all the arguments that I've just said about team members feeling uncomfortable about being asked to get together in a what's deemed a safe environment, but can it be guaranteed a safe environment? There's that side of things. The other side that he put forward, which I hadn't even considered, was these marshals being volunteers give up time, take time off their main jobs, off work, or give up weekends when they're not working to be able to do this. Almost all of them have to take at least some time off work to cover a Grand Prix weekend, which goes from Thursday right through to Sunday. Now, if these people, as many of them are currently out of work, have been furloughed or literally have had their industries ground to a halt, many of them may be self-employed. Are they still going to be able to take time off work just to go to a Formula One Grand Prix event where they're not going to be paid? That is definitely a factor. Can Formula One rely on the same level of support that marshals are normally so willing and committed to giving up when their own personal circumstances will have changed dramatically over the last couple of months. Maybe they're no longer in a position, even if they wanted to be able to give up that time when they might have to be working different hours in their main job just to survive. Formula One has a huge number of challenges to make this happen, and that's let alone from any social distancing that might have to be applied to a Grand Prix. I mean, I'm a firm believer that there is no way we can apply current social distancing rules of keeping 2 metres apart in staging a race. I mean, there's just so many reasons that can't happen. Couldn't happen within a Formula One garage, it couldn't happen in a pit stop. I mean, there's just no way that can happen. Now, perhaps you could negate that if you can prove that nobody within that Formula One circus is showing symptoms or is carrying the virus. But I think that's such a hard thing to prove and to guarantee all the way through an event. We can't even get enough people tested in this country that genuinely need that test for health reasons, let alone just testing people so they can stage a Formula One Grand Prix for entertainment purposes. And the other side to this whole argument, and another thing my wife touched on this morning, is what's the public opinion going to be on this? I don't mean Formula One fans. We all want to see racing happening, surely. That's a given. We're all desperate to see cars going around a circuit. But what if somebody does contract the virus by accident somewhere through this process? And then it comes back to this argument of, well, did we really need to get that many people together to hold this Formula One Grand Prix? What's the public opinion going to be on that? Andreas Seidel mentioned this, I think, the other day at McLaren. We should only really be doing this not only when it's deemed safe to do so, but when it's deemed acceptable by the public to do so. The world's changed, priorities have changed, and for a lot of people, Formula One won't be right at the top of that list of priorities. Anyway, those are just a few considerations, and I'm not saying Formula One hasn't considered any of these. Of course they have. They are very clever people. They will be looking at every single aspect, but they're perhaps things that on the first glance might not be so obvious, and things that when we see a calendar and we'll get excited that we might go racing again on the 5th of July, we need to think about some of these things and how on earth we might get over them. Of course, a few quid can grease the wheels of some of these things, paying circuits to hold races when they can't make money from fans. But are you going to be able to compensate teams, the staff members, marshals, circuit officials, and all of those other people required to stage this massive spectacle of a Formula One Grand Prix? As ever, I'd love to know your thoughts, so drop me a line, and until next time, see you later.